So-Called is sponsored by loveboiseparks.org, which donates profits to support, promote, and preserve open spaces in Boise, Idaho. Use promo code SOCALLED for 10% off all your purchases at loveboiseparks.org.
So being focused and doing what you can and doing that well is really important. And so the power of saying no.
This is Mark Wojcik, and I'm wondering, how's your so-called career? Welcome to So-Called, the podcast that explores the why and how of work. On today's episode, we meet Lisa Schelbe, Associate Professor at Florida State University College of Social Work. When we met, I learned that she has a number of other roles, too.
Associate Professor at Florida State University College of Social Work. But I wear other hats, too. I'm also the editor of the co-editor of the Child and Adolescent Social Work Journal, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the APSAC Advisor, and APSAC is the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children. And then I also wear two other hats as an author. I have 30 plus peer-reviewed publications, and I've co-authored a book, The Intergenerational Transmission of Child Maltreatment, which I know is a mouthful, and my second co-authored book is a textbook coming out, which is the Handbook on Child Welfare Practice. And that comes out in August. And then I'm currently writing a book on the experiences of young people transitioning out of foster care. And then the fourth role that I play is I co-chair the Child Wellbeing Research Network, which is a national network of scholars from different backgrounds, experiences, perspectives, disciplines who are seeking to reduce child maltreatment and increase child well-being. So I sort of wear those four hats of associate professor, editor, author, and co-chair. Child well-being and prevention of child maltreatment is really the common theme throughout all of my work.
Tell me what you like about that.
So what I love about it is I feel like it's an area that I can have impact, and yet I really did stumble into this. When I was in my doc program, I was part of a study, and we interviewed foster youth, and we were talking to these young people who were leaving the foster care system. And I just was incredibly inspired. And it was at that point that I really pivoted. And I found that it was something that I was excited to see that there was so much work that needed to be done, and horrified all at the same time. And I started adopting this mentality that it was my responsibility, in fact, all of our responsibilities, to care about these young people in care. And in the same way that I'm a taxpayer, mm-hmm. My money is supporting the child welfare system. It is supporting the foster care system. So just like my money buys my haircut, or my money buys my oil change, my money makes that my foster care system and my child welfare system. And so I feel very strongly that I need to be part of solving these problems. And so my work is all designed intentionally to have an impact, to improve the systems that are serving these children and youth and their families. Thinking about the maltreatment that children experience, that's absolutely hard, and really can be heavy. And yet knowing that my work is potentially increasing their well-being, preventing violence and maltreatment in the future, and in some cases breaking the cycle. So these young people who had experienced maltreatment are able to go to college and to leave a life free of violence in the future. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Despite the challenges of working in her field, Lisa is hopeful about the difference her contribution can make.
My job is to help move the field along, and yet I'm not going to work myself out of a job. I mean, We are continue to have child maltreatment for the foreseeable future. We're not, as much as I say that we're focusing on prevention, we're not going to stop all of it. So there's always going to be work left to do. I mean, one of the big things right now that we're looking at I'm seeing a special period of transformation is around racial equity. And I see that lot of attention and energy and thoughtfulness that's going into addressing this right now. I see this as that, like, I get to be part of this. And that's the thing that with my work with the Child Wellbeing Research Network, is it's a community of researchers that are so committed to like making sure that things are improving. We're not just doing research for esoteric purposes. Like, we are action oriented for practice and in policy improvements. And it brings a lot of hope.
There's practice and teaching and then writing and publishing. How do those fit together for you?
For me, the writing and the publishing is really important. One, the writing helps clarify my thinking. But it's also sharing the thoughts and ideas that I have. And I am committed to my work going broader than academic publications. So I do write and actually edit a peer-reviewed peer-reviewed journals. But I also am committed to getting work out there through blogs, through technical reports, through books. And that these are things that are not behind a paywall, that they are accessible. And it's important to have my work out there to me. Not that it's self-serving and, that it benefits like my ego, but that I think that these are ideas that I'm developing with co-authors and they're, I start feeling like I'm giving a TED talk. They're ideas worth spreading, but you get what I'm saying? Like that are ideas that, or in some case, research findings that we can say, look, this is what the research says, and this is how we need to think about it. So I am very committed to getting ideas out there.
Lisa started her college career in pre-med and had taken her MCATs, but then she learned something important on her way to becoming a doctor.
And the summer before my senior year in college, I worked in a hospital. It turns out I hate hospitals.
Okay.
I hate hospitals more than anything else I've ever hated before. And it was this existential crisis. And I no longer had a career plan. And my senior year in college was kind of rough.
Yeah.
I had a friend who knew someone who was looking to hire an overnight staff at a domestic violence shelter. So this was a shelter for women and children who had experienced intimate partner violence. And I worked there one or two nights a week. I would get there at midnight and I'd leave at 8:00 the next morning. And I liked it. I liked it a lot. And so it was interesting that it launched me into working in social services. And from there, I graduated from college. I worked at an agency that served families experiencing all types of violence. And then very quickly, I realized that as much as I loved working with families, I was getting burnt out. And so I went and I got my master's in social work, and I was much more interested in the administrative side, the program development, and not the direct one-on-one contact. And so then I had my master's in social work, and I worked for several years and in various assistant director positions. And I loved the work. But I just kept thinking that I could do more. And I got a job as an adjunct instructor at Warren Wilson College in North Carolina. And I was like, ooh, this is where I can make a difference. So I pursued my doctorate. And it was then that I started to make the connection of like how my research could really help influence change as well. So it's not just that I was changing, I was developing for social work students, but I was also contributing to the knowledge base. So I always thought like, well, I'll become a professor and I'll teach, but it's the creation of knowledge as well that really started getting me excited too. So that's where I find myself today. And I look back and at the time, it wasn't so clear that the journey that I was on. I'm presenting it as if it was a very straightforward journey. That's all hindsight. And there were lots of times in my life that I wasn't sure where the next steps were. And even now, as I'm looking, it's like, well, I think I know where my career is going, but I still have plenty of options. So I'm sure in 5, 10 years from now, I'll look back at this point and say like, oh, and that's why I went this path. Who knows?
Did it surprise you that you liked the 12 to 8 shift and and that work?
Oh my gosh, you absolutely. It was just a complete shock to me. And let me tell you, not only was the shift surprising, but the amount of things that I learned by talking to women who were different than I was, meaning they were sometimes double or triple my age. They had children. They had just, it was such a broad spectrum of who people were. And I was surprised by how much I learned. And looking back, I think it's funny that I was that surprised, because here I was, a middle class, fairly sheltered, white 21-year-old, working at a shelter that was in an urban setting with predominantly African-American women. And why did I think that my life was going to be very similar to theirs? Like, and it actually has really shaped the way that I interact with my students and research participants and even colleagues, knowing that like our backgrounds are so, they form us, and they're so important to consider. And at the same time, we're all really interested in the same thing of like being connected, being safe, being valued. There's, so as much as we are very different, and I was so shocked with how much I was learning when I was in my early 20s there. It's also fascinating, like looking back, as like I was already starting to be like, and we are all very similar.
What's next for you?
Yeah, so I am interested in doing some new things moving forward, and some of them are sort of in the works right now. It's loose, but some is really translating my work to a broader public audience. So I am writing a book right now that's an ethnography of young people leaving the foster care system. So I am interested in helping these young people's voices be heard in the broad general public. And so I do see that my work is moving into the public sphere a little bit. I also see that my interest in dissemination of findings and making sure that research is really informing practice and policy. I'm interested in starting to, and I've done a little bit of work here with some colleagues about building these research policy practice partnerships. So you bring together a team of a researcher, some policymakers, and some practitioners, so that it's not that I, as a research, give information and push it out, policymakers and practitioners. Rather, it's a much more egalitarian relationship where policymakers say, well, I have questions. How do we do this? And the practitioners also are bringing questions, and then we see what data are available, and we work together as a team. So moving forward, I am much more, I'm very interested in doing more of these partnerships and collaborations. So I see that that's another direction that I'm going, which in some regards is kind of the same. It's like I want the ideas and the work to have impact, and I want the work to be meaningful. The unique perspective that I bring with the research policy practice partnerships is also the need to really bring along stakeholders. So the children and families who are impacted by the child welfare system.
What advice would you give to your younger self?
Advice to my younger self. This is advice that I would continue to give to myself right now, but definitely I would really, really try to drive this point home, is that you can't have it all and you can't do it all. And there is so much work to be done. There's so many opportunities, and it's important to not get stretched so thinly that you're inefficient with everything. So being focused and doing what you can and doing that well is really important. And so the power of saying no. An important perk of my job is that there is a lot of this autonomy and choice involved, but it's also a bit of a mindset for me that I'm choosing how I'm spending my time. And that gives me a lot of control. So when projects start feeling intense and deadlines are building up, I always can remind myself, it's like, well, I'm here because I chose to be here. Like I said yes at some point, or didn't say no. And here I am. So how am I going to choose to react? And for me, that's the way that I juggle everything and know that I always can change my mind. I always can make another choice. And that's been really key about my career as well as my daily life. It really helps ground me. And that's something that my work can feel really overwhelming. So having that be the thing that keeps me grounded is really helpful. So that would be my advice is you can't have it all, you can't be it all.
So Called is sponsored by loveboiseparks.org, which donates profits to support, promote, and preserve open spaces in Boise, Idaho. Use promo code SOCALLED for 10% off all your purchases at loveboiseparks.org. Our theme and transition music was composed by Roberto Cavaco. All other stylings are the sound of my voice. If you enjoyed today's episode, please let us know. Subscribe and leave us a review. So Called is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and wherever you get your podcasts.